All right, if you would, open up to Acts chapter 27. We're going to go on a ship ride today. And going through, and I'm hoping to cover all of Acts 27 today. We'll see what happens. But the maps that are in front of you are the same as what's up on the screen. And, you know, you can just look online. You can Google map of Acts 27, and you'll probably find that pretty quick for anybody who's listening to online on YouTube. So you can find these same things, and the reason I like these maps is because they're numbered, and so you can follow things along as opposed to me just telling you a place and going, now where is that on the map? I know there are better maps out there. But sometimes whenever you're reading through a place that has so much geography, just to be able to follow along and see those things is pretty helpful, I think. Hopefully you find that way too. If you remember at the end of chapter 26, Paul has stood before King Agrippa, Agrippa's sister Bernice, as well as the governor, Festus, and at the end, they still don't necessarily have anything that they want to write down to send with Paul about accusations, why he's being sent, why he's going before Caesar, and appealing to Caesar. And since he had appealed to Caesar he's got to go. And if you remember, where did that trial in Acts chapter 26 take place? Caesarea. And if you notice on your map in the lower right-hand corner, Caesarea is number 2. So no, that's where we're starting today. So here he was. Remember, he was imprisoned there for 2 years, and now this happens at the end. He's appealed to Caesar. It's time to go to Rome. And you may think, okay, well, let's go to Rome. Understand the trek that they're going to take is about 2,000 miles by sea. It's 2,000 miles by sea without the aid of a motor on the back of your ship. And we're dealing with ships, not boats. Don't think of this thing as being small, and especially the second ship that we're going to get on. It's going to be, in order to take on 276 people, it's going to be pretty big, even at a very conservative estimate, about a 100-foot-long vessel. So if you want to go out here on the corner and stand and look at the sidewalk that keeps on going out into the parking lot, it's about 100 feet long. And so just think about standing there and being on a ship that's, like I said, really, really conservative, 100 feet. It may have been well bigger than that on some of these ships that we're going to talk about. And to think, I don't know how you feel about getting on a boat. I don't know how you feel about getting on a large vessel like a ship. I don't know if you get queasy when you get out there and it starts rocking and turning. And there are times where you may think, you know, stop the world, I want to get off. I've kind of reached my edge. And you're going to understand some things as they go through. This is not going to be smooth sailing. Now, chapter 27 opens up, so let's see who all's traveling here with Paul to begin with. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. First of all, we. Who else is on this journey? Luke is. So you got Paul, you got Luke, you've got some other prisoners. So there's other prisoners who are setting sail here too, as well as an Augustan Roman centurion by the name of Julius. Here he is, Augustan. Just think about Caesar Augustus. It's Roman. That'll be enough for now. Verse 2. And embarking in the Adramyttian's ship, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we put out to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. Now, an Adramyttian ship, if you look on your map where it has the number 8 and you go just north, Asia, it's going to have a big name there, Adramyttium. That's where this ship was from. In other words, you notice it's a coastal place. They are fantastic at sailing ships. So this is not somebody who's, you know, their dad set sail and used to fish a little bit, and now they're going to go out and set sail across the Mediterranean Sea. They're getting on a ship very well made. So just kind of keep that in mind. Also here in verse 2, he says it's about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia. Notice, is this ship aiming to go to Rome? 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 Is this ship aiming to go to R No. It's like, we're just going to go along the southern part of Asia, modern-day Turkey. You know where that is on the map, I think. So they're kind of going that way. If you've ever flown, do you ever have to get a connecting flight? Well, welcome to the mariner side of this. One ship's going to take you so far, it's going to go, okay, that's about as far as we go, because they're trade routes and things they go back and forth on. You're going to have to find another ship at that point to keep on going to where you're looking to be. So here they are, and now we get somebody else added in. It's not just Paul, and it's not just Luke. Now who comes on board? Aristarchus. And Aristarchus has been with Paul before. If you look back in Acts chapter 19, Acts chapter 20, Aristarchus is a Macedonian. He's from Thessalonica. He's been a traveling companion with Paul. So realize, and even later on, we're not going to read it, but you can take a note of Colossians chapter 4, verse 10. And whenever Paul's writing the prison letter from Rome to Colossae, he mentions Aristarchus. He says, my fellow prisoner. So you realize Aristarchus, by the time they get to Rome, Aristarchus is going to be right there beside him, where Paul's going to say, not that Aristarchus has to be there, he said, he's with me, he's my fellow prisoner. So realize Aristarchus is going to make this complete journey. That's the last time you're going to read his name.
So do you know about how long it took them to get from Caesarea to Rome?
Well, I'm going to give you, you're going to notice how many times as we go through the chapter, it's going to tell us about one of the journeys is going to take like 14 or 15 days. It's not going to tell you the first one, but it's going to use terms like many days. So I'd estimate somewhere around, 20 to 30 days for everything that we're going to read about in Acts chapter 27. And that is just an estimate. So keep that in mind. But we'll make some time marks as we go. So you see, you have Paul, you have Luke, you have Aristarchus, you have some other prisoners, and you have Julius, of the Augustan cohort, a Roman centurion. So, verse 3. The next day, all right, so we're on day 2 now. I'm not going to tell you it's going to line out. You're going to be able to know every day as we go, but you'll get a general idea. It says, the next day we put in at Sidon. Sidon is number 3 on your map. He says, and Julius treated Paul with consideration, allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. How does Julius feel about Paul? Compassionate. And to go, sometimes in these situations, somebody comes in, it's not as if Julius is a saint, and to go, sometimes the Lord allows you to find favor. And whenever someone does show you favor, who's to be thanked? The Lord is. It's kind of an interesting little note back in the book of Daniel, especially Daniel chapter 1. It talks about, and God showed Daniel favor. And you realize, typically when you see that happen, it's because someone is striving by faith to serve the Lord. Not always. But a lot of times it comes up in Scripture. Sometimes you find grace that you didn't expect. Here you go. Here's how he's being treated. Verse 4. From there we put out to sea. Notice, here's the we again. Notice that, and Luke's going to include himself because he's there. So then we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And if you notice from 3, you move around to the island of Cyprus, and 4, and then working around it says under the shelter of. Because depending on whether the winds were with you or against you, you might go to the north of Cyprus or you might go to the south of Cyprus. Because you don't want the winds to be blowing your sailing ship in the wrong direction, because you can't turn on the motor and make it go where you want it to go. So you're a little at the mercy of the winds. Now, here they are. They come around through here, shelter of Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. Verse 5. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, and those are the regions that are there, 5 and 6, he says, we landed at Myra in Lycia. Lycia is the region, Myra is the city. There's 7. Then, verse 6. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. So you notice, they get to Myra, and that's where, okay, we're going to change ships. And you go, Julius takes them that far, but the centurion finds an Alexandrian ship. Now, where is Alexandria? Egypt, northern Egypt, along the coast of the Mediterranean. You might think about the greatest library at the time is in the city of Alexandria. There's actually a Jewish constituency there. But here's the point. Once again, you got off on a Dromaean ship, fine vessel, and now you get on an Alexandrian ship, and you go, hey, here's another one. And it's almost like you could tell you about car brands, like, oh, this is a great one. Oh, yeah, this is a good one. I'm not going to tell you which one it is, because who knows. But to look at it and go, they're not getting on anything that's insignificant. They're not getting on some ship that's barely holding together with what I would say is duct tape and baling wire, but they didn't have those then. But you look at it and to see, okay, here they are. The centurion, notice, remember what his job is. Guard the prisoners and make sure Paul gets where? To Rome. And this is where Julius is going to say, he's yours. Now, he says they find this ship that's sailing to Italy, and he put us aboard it. And you think about, once again, you got Luke, you got Paul, you got Aristarchus, and some of these other prisoners perhaps. We know there's going to be prisoners, but so now we're on the second leg of our journey. It's been pretty uneventful so far, right? It's like, okay, the winds are contrary a little bit. We'll just keep going. Paul's been shown favor. This is going good. Now we get on this next ship, an Alexandrian ship. Then verse 7. When we had sailed slowly for a good many days, notice time frame. It just says a good many days. You don't get an exact number. You'll see later on whenever Paul's going to say something along the lines of many days or something like that, it's going to be quite some time, like maybe 10 days, but it's just a guess. He says, when we had sailed slowly for a good many days and with difficulty had arrived off Cnidus, since the wind did not permit us to go further, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmon. Now, I want you to notice Cnidus is on your map. It's right on the tip there of Asia, number 8. Here's something you need to start paying attention to. It sounds like in verse 7, when we had sailed slowly for a good many days, how does that sound on the surface? It just sounds like I'm on a Mediterranean cruise, right? It's going slow. We're just moving along. But then notice this. And with difficulty had arrived off Cnidus. There's your first time. You're going to see some words start to show up. Difficulty. Winds being contrary. We saw that back in verse 4. Now, he's going to talk about it here in a minute, dangerous. So, with difficulty had arrived off Cnidus, and you see where it is on the map, number 8. He says, since the wind did not permit us to go further, where did they want to go? What cardinal direction? They want to go west. I mean, where are they aiming to get to? Italy. Well, you can see where Italy is on the map. And going, man, they want to go west, and they just want to sail like right underneath Greece and work their way up there, be the simplest route. But that's not how it's going to go. I don't know if you've ever been in a car trip and you thought, not going to take us long, we'll just go from here to there, and all of a sudden, road construction. And you think, oh no, how many miles? For them, it's not road construction, it's about winds. So here they are. And here's still something for you. Who controls the winds? God does. Who stands over all creation? The Lord does. So, understand, is this just happenstance? Certainly not. And sometimes we need to understand that too. There are things that they don't function right on certain days, and they go, okay. I don't need to get so angry or perturbed or frustrated. I need to realize, all right, not going to happen today. And that's okay. Sometimes we're a little bit more at ease with that than others. But if you notice, it says, since the wind did not permit us to go further, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salome. And if you notice the island, where you're going to get down to 9, which is where Cape Salome is, Crete, of course, is that entire island. He says, we're going to go underneath it. It's like maybe the wind will catch the island and it won't blow us way down in the south toward Africa. So they decide to go around the bottom side. We'd say the south side of the island. Oh, you almost wish you were a mariner when you read through chapter 27. There's so many different, he's going to start using some shipping terms, and we'll define them as we go. Verse 8. And with difficulty, sailing past it, we came to a place called Fairhavens, which was near the city of Lasea. And notice, once again, easy, difficulty. Now, when you think about being on a ship, and you hear the term difficulty, how are you imagining the ship's stabilization to be? I mean, it's rocking, is the way you would probably think about it. And if you notice, they're not going great vast distances, per se, just right through here, but they come around the bend and they come to this place called Fairhavens, which, doesn't that sound like a great name for a place to be? Like Mediterranean cruise, they're going to go to Fairhavens. I mean, it sounds really good, but is that the way it's going? No, it's not. Now, he says, it's near the city of Lasea, which is on the map, but here they are at 10 in Fairhavens. Verse 9. When considerable time had passed, once again, it doesn't give you how many days, it just tells you it's been a while, considerable number of days. He says, considerable time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous. Do you see how we've progressed? It's gone from earlier on the first ship, well, okay, yeah, winds were contrary, but they made it just fine. Now that we're on the Alexandrian ship, to go difficulty, dangerous. Oh. He says, now things are getting dangerous. You just tell me in English, what's the difference between difficulty and dangerous?
Difficulty is still maybe handling, but it's dangerous. It's almost out of our control.
All right, you kind of think along those lines of going, difficulty, okay, we're met with opposition. Danger, we're talking about life. Like something could happen to us here. So here they are. It's no longer difficulty, now we're into dangerous. He says, since even the fast was already over. Fast. Now, be real careful here. Why are they fasting? I mean, you look at what's going on, and you go, is everybody on this ship Jewish? No. I know there's some footnotes here, and it talks about, oh, it's the fast, it's the Day of Atonement. I want you to think about this. Since even the fast was already over, you're going to find whenever people get out on ships, especially whenever you're a bunch of prisoners.
It says, in mine, it says the Day of Atonement in September and October.
Right, I know it says that, but it just says even the fast was already over.
It could have been over months.
Right, and you realize here they are on the ship, and it's not a bunch of Jewish people. You're going to find here in a minute there's going to be another fast, and I think you'll understand a little bit more about what's going on. I mean, why would you fast if you're on a ship? Seasick, maybe a lack of food. To realize it's not as if this thing's going according to plan, right? In so many other scenarios, you start to ration things out and go, do we really have to eat today? I know you've had days like that in your life. It's not that you do something out of a devotion to God to fast. You go, I just don't feel like eating today. Or some days are so bumpy and rough, you go, I'm just not going to do that. And so you look at these things together. I'm just going to encourage you. Just says the fast, just let it be the fast. Don't tie anything else to it. In the same sense that the New Testament uses the word ecclesia sometimes and doesn't mean the church. It just means a called out assembly. It can be a town government, all these different kinds of things. There are times even where the Greek word for apostle is used, and it doesn't mean an apostle of Jesus. It can be just a messenger or someone who's sent out by a government. So sometimes we see a word that we're used to seeing in a spiritual setting, and we start reading the spiritual setting into it, and it's not always there. So just be careful with it. Then, he says, Paul began to admonish them. When you hear admonish, what do you think? warning. Now, don't you kind of see those two words typically together? Danger, warning. Now, here's the warning. Verse 10. And said to them, Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. What does that tell you about how dangerous it is? It's dangerous enough to make a statement. And he's saying, I'm not just saying that there's going to be a great loss in terms of, we're not just talking about cargo, and we're not just talking about the ship. He said, we're talking about, it's possible we may lose our lives. Now, usually that's whenever you get people pretty serious. When in a difficult situation, to go, is this really that bad? And then you find somebody who's a reasonable thinker, and they go, you realize we might actually die. And then you see people go, oh, I didn't realize it was that serious. Judy. Right, he'd already had the vision from God telling him, you witnessed here, you're going to witness in Rome. So what kind of shape he's going to be in when he gets to Rome, that's the part he doesn't know, right? But he'll discover it as we go. Here we continue, verse 11. I want you to see what they think about Paul at this point. This is what you're going to see change over the course of this trip. He says, but the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul. How does the centurion feel about these things? Do I listen to Paul, or do I listen to the guy who pilots this trip all the time, and the captain? And you go, the pilot is the one who holds we would say the wheel, and not quite the same scenario there. But to go, the captain is he's the one who's really over the ship. So, he goes, Paul, it's almost like, I appreciate your words of encouragement, but I'm going to stick with the captain and the pilot. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 12. Because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there if somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now, if you notice where we are at Fairhaven, they're going to look, notice Fairhaven is just not quite good enough for spending the winter in, which tells you it's already the winter. Now that adds another element to this Mediterranean cruise, doesn't it? Because all of a sudden it's not like, oh, this is fantastic. It's 78 degrees and sunny. But going, man, this is winter. You think about getting on a ship at winter time, that's a different picture. I don't think of it snowing. Don't go that far, because we are pretty close, getting closer to the equator. I'm not saying we're there, but that's in northern Africa. But you hit through it and go, it's colder. And if you're on a ship when it's colder, how are you feeling? Cold, and whenever it gets dangerous out there, wet, and wet and cold, how does that go? I mean, you realize this is not, the vacation setting picture. Carla.
Another thing, in the Mediterranean, a lot of these islands, you can't get close to shore.
Right.
Because when I was on Crete, we had to be shut.
Right. Definitely so.
You're talking about that. You're talking about a ship being out there, if the winds come up high, it can blow it away.
Right.
But also, to get the people onto shore was a big deal.
Having the little schooner boats to get them back and forth takes a lot of trips. So you realize at this point of going, you come to the harbor, it's not suitable for wintering, it's not deep enough. And at the same time, it says the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there if somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete. And if you look down a little ways on the island of Crete, you see where Phoenix is at number 11. They're going, you know what, if we could just get a little bit farther, and it's only like, 60 to 90 miles down. So it doesn't seem like it's just a terrible place to go. If we can get the winds to hit on the right, we can just get down there. It'd be much better to spend the winter there, better for everything. And you go, okay. So the majority reached a decision. They put out to sea from there. And notice, where are they aiming to hit? They want to go to Phoenix, and not Phoenix, Arizona, Phoenix on the island of Crete. And of course, the way it describes the harbor there, this is the most cardinal direction craziness I've ever seen, but I know it's true because that's what it says. Facing southwest and northwest. I'm not quite sure how you do that without being on the end of the island, but anyway, that's the way it was. And you can even look it up on Google Maps now and take a see it. He says, spend the winter there. So their plan is to go from Fair Havens to Phoenix, and just like on some of your travel plans, that's not the way it's going to go. So, verse 13. And just to kind of let you know, from this point forward, from the time they take off from Fair Havens, the tally number on the ship is 276 people. So, realize, when you're talking about doing things on a ship, 276 people is a lot of people to deal with. I want you to just take a moment here. I'm not going to get us way off in the deep end here. What all do you have to think about with 276 people on one ship out in the sea? Waste. So, what might you do to keep waste from happening? Dump it over. You realize, too, if we don't eat as much, there's not as much waste. You start to see some things, and you go, this isn't pretty. I'm not telling you that being out to sea on a ship like this was pretty. This is not taking the Carnival Cruise Line across the Mediterranean. This is quite different, as you can tell already. They've already been in danger. They've already had the winds contrary to them. Now they're going, we're just going to move 90 miles down the island, 60 miles down the island. If we can get to Phoenix, we'll spend the winter there. And then all of a sudden, things change. So, verse 13. When a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete close inshore. The winds are with us. So, pull the anchors in. We'll just go right along the southern coast of the island of Crete. We'll get down to Phoenix. We'll be fine for the winter. Which tells you winter is upon them. And instead of being in the harbor at Phoenix, everything's about to go south. Literally south. Verse 14. But before very long, there rushed down from the land a violent wind called Euraquilo. And when the ship was caught in it and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and let ourselves be driven along. You just imagine, you've got the island for a bit of a shield, and then you start to sail underneath it, and then the wind hits, and then you just go, and all of a sudden, you're not going to make it to Phoenix. You can't even see Phoenix anymore. And so, here they are going down, and I would compare it to, maybe you have grandchildren, or maybe whenever you were a child you did this. It's like having a box fan that you have sitting up and running, and then you make a paper airplane, and you go, hey, let's throw it and see if we can get it to go in front of the fan. And you throw it, and then it gets in front of the fan, and it just goes what? And it just takes off. We're not talking about paper airplanes. We're talking about ships. And notice the way the wind is described. A nor'easter is what it's called. But notice, what does it say about it? Violent. You think about those terms. A violent wind. How's your ship doing? How you feeling? You turning green yet? You having to put your head over the side and let lunch go? I mean, you realize this is not fun. This is not fun at all. And so here they are, and notice they have to make some decisions with the ship. He says, we couldn't face the wind and just kind of let it go around us. They're broadsided to the wind, which tells you what? You get driven even more. You ever been up on I-70 whenever it's really windy, a north to south wind, and one of those big old semis comes alongside you, and you see it go, and you're like, go get it my lane. It's a lot different with a ship because there's no way to just steer it back into line. So you realize they couldn't face the wind to funnel the wind around them. They're broadsided to it to where all of a sudden it pushes them down even further away than where they want to be. Things getting better or worse? Huh. That ever happened in your life? Where you go, we got an easy plan. We're just going to go down to Phoenix. It's going to be great. And then all of a sudden, how did this happen? And things go south. Notice how it continues, verse 16. Running under the shelter of a small island called Claudia, and Claudia is 12 on the map. They don't actually go to Phoenix. It's just on the map as 11. So here they are, Claudia. They start sailing underneath it, and you realize, man, here they are. We were scarcely able to keep the ship's boat under control. Now, what you notice here about, it says the ship's boat. You're thinking, what's going on here? But the idea with the ship's boat is really about those little small schooner boats that they put up there that you can get, if you're in kind of shallow water where the ship can't get into the port, you take those little boat and you take it in back and forth, kind of like a ferry in one sense. And he goes, you know what? Even those things are rocking back and forth. However, they were tied to the ship. And you're going, oh, this isn't pretty. This isn't fun. Don't get your fingers in between there. So here they are. He says, man, we could scarcely keep the ship's boat under control, let alone the ship. Verse 17. After they had hoisted it up, that little small boat, hoisted up and kind of to pull it in tight, he says, they used supporting cables and undergirding the ship, and fearing that they might run aground on the shallows of Syrtis, they let down the sea anchor, and in this way let themselves be driven along. You think about, what are they getting concerned about? The ship itself, of just coming apart, and they go, you know what, we're going to throw these cables or ropes underneath the ship, and it's going to carry it underneath, and then we're going to get on the other side and pull them up. And we're basically going to tie this ship together to give it some more strength. Which tells you, is this normal? No. Are you getting an idea about how bad this is yet? And to go, they do this on these different systems. And notice, because their fear is, it's too shallow down here. We don't want to be here. We can't get out of here. But we're going to run this ship right into the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea as we get closer to these other places, and then the whole ship's going to come apart, and what are we going to do then? Yeah, swim or sink. Now, so they let down the sea anchor. They're trying to get anything they can to drag along the bottom to slow them down. And he says, and they just had to let themselves be driven along. It's like it's going to be what it's going to be. And we don't know what that is. Karen? Huh, that's interesting.
Nor'easters are almost a hurricane force.
Right, they are, definitely so, for sure. Notice how we continue, verse 18. The next day, how was day one? Man, you think at any point in time somebody's going, you know, maybe Paul knew what he was talking about. It says, the next day as we were being violently storm-tossed, they began to jettison the cargo. And you notice, I mean, throw it overboard. Now, here's another question for you. You realize, violently storm-tossed, which you realize, do you see the terminology just getting worse and worse as you go down the story? You might think to yourself, why would you start throwing off all your supplies? Not all of them, but some of them, the cargo. I mean, the whole purpose of taking this trip is so that mariners can do what? Sell their cargo on the other end of when they get to port so that they can make money. What are they doing at this point? We're not concerned about money anymore. We're concerned about our lives. And at the same time, whenever you start to take water onto the ship starts sinking down in the water. And if the water comes over the side, sink or swim. That's your options. And you realize, how do you get the boat to sit up a little bit higher in the water? Get rid of weight. And you just start throwing stuff overboard that you don't think you're going to need. Now, here they are. Keep going. Verse 19. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Like, they're even getting rid of shipping tackle that they might use in certain scenarios. They're going, you know what? We probably don't need this humongous, you can start naming through ship tackle. They go, We don't need that. Get rid of that. And so they keep on going. Verse 20. So there's the third day. Notice it's like, 13 through, or 12 through 17, day 1. Verse 18, day 2. Verse 19, day 3. Verse 20, since neither sun nor stars appeared for many days. Many days. When you're out on the sea and you don't see stars and you don't see the sun, can you even tell how many days it's been? You talk about losing track of time.
And they use the stars for
Navigation as well. And so you realize, and remember, what season is it? Oh, and it's cold too. And you realize, this is not pleasurable. Yeah, don't have the same kind of data we think about today. Then, go ahead.
Their winter season, is it the same time as our winter season, or are they like Australia?
It's the same. They're in the northern hemisphere like we are. So it's the same. It's the same. Then, anyway. So in verse 20, it says, since neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and so you go, okay, it's been a long time. He's going to reestablish days here in a little bit to give you a better picture, but anyway, been a long time. No small storm was assailing us, from then on, all hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. What's happening to the ship morale? It's tanking. You realize there might be some people who are a little hopeful, and then, kind of, when you get a big enough group, you get people who start to go, we're dying. You get other people who are going, maybe we can make it. And realize all of a sudden the ship morale is just kind of sliding downward. So then, it's just being gradually abandoned about having hope of these things. And remember, it's a hope. Think in terms of, don't think of English word hope. I'm going hope in terms of like a confident expectation of what's going to happen. Verse 21. When they had gone a long time without food, oh, it's been a while. How do you feel after a few days without food? Somebody says exhausted, grumpy, hangry. But you look at this and you go, then Paul stood up in their midst and said, Men, you ought to have followed my advice and not to have set sail from Crete and incurred this damage and loss. Now, I want you to kind of notice it. He makes the statement. When does he wait to make the statement? What's happening to the morale? It's sinking low. I want you to notice, it's been many days at this point. We already saw day 3, and then we saw, this gradual amount of time. But they've probably been on the ship for like 10 days by now. You'll see here in a minute we're going to get down to 14 days. But in doing that, you realize he's been silent this whole time. He hasn't made this kind of statement. He hasn't told the centurion or the captain or the pilot, you should have listened to me. But now that it is blatantly obvious, sometimes it's worth talking about the blatantly obvious. Now, here he is. He makes a statement. He says, you ought to have followed my advice not to have set sail from Crete, incurring this damage and loss. And they already knew. They've already jettisoned cargo. They're not going to make any money on this trip. Then, verse 22. And Paul's going to speak all the way from verses 21 down to verse 26. So realize this is all one speech, statement, however you want to put it. And so he says in verse 22, yet now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. Can you imagine these people listening going, how in the world does he know that? Where is he getting that from? Now, you imagine a bunch of people who gradually abandoned hope. How open are they to such good news? This guy is a wacko. He is so seasick, he's lost his mind.
But if they think back, he told them that was going to happen.
I know. And then here's the clincher. Verse 23. For this very night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood before me, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you. Now, here's the thing. You put that in front of people, and they still have a choice. Am I going to believe what Paul's God said through this angel, or am I not going to believe what this angel said to Paul? Just like typical. You go, some will, some won't. But to realize, why did he preface that first statement with, you should have listened to me? Was it because, and realize this, when people say, I told you so, who are they typically pointing to? Themselves. Does Paul bring it up for that reason? He's trying to say, look, I'm not like you. He says, I'm ready to listen. He says, I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen then. Now that morale has completely been abandoned, he says, are you ready to listen now? He says, I got a message. God told me I'm going to go before Caesar. And he's granted me my life, and in telling me that, he's also granted you your life. Did happen, did come to pass. So you realize what's at hand. He says, God has granted it. He says, you must stand before Caesar. And you go, notice, when does God give Paul the reassurance?
When things are at the very worst.
Day 3? Day 4? I mean, think about it. It just says many days. It hadn't been months yet. We'll see that here in a minute. But to go, I mean, day 8, day 9, day 10. I mean, this has been a torrent type of journey or trip for this whole time. And God doesn't immediately step in and say, day 1, hey, just want you to know, you're going to make it before Caesar. Everybody on the ship's going to be spared. Isn't that something? When do we want to hear that it's all going to turn out fine? At the very beginning. And for some reason, we get disheartened when you don't see something that happens really quick and realize, here they are. And it's not until this very night, and I want you to notice, Paul points that out. He says, I heard it tonight, and I'm telling you now. Notice how it continues. Verse 25. Therefore, keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told, but we must run aground on a certain island. Well, how about that? We're already looking down the line. And he says, I believe God. What does that pose a kind of an unspoken question to them? Do you? Getting people to even ask that question. They go, well, I believe in gods, the gods of the sea. I like Poseidon really good, but apparently he's not pleased right now for those Greek gods. But to go, or Neptune, you look at it here and go, keep up your courage. I believe God. He says, and maybe you'll come to faith too. Right.
Sometimes we want to just get from here to there and just get as quickly as we can.
Right. Think about Paul, Luke, Aristarchus, these other prisoners. I mean, centurion, pilot, captain. You get all these things together. He says, but we must run aground on a certain island. It's interesting, he doesn't name it, and God didn't tell him. I can tell you what island it is because Luke wrote it down. Now, notice how we continue. Here's our time stamp, Andrea. Verse 27. But when the 14th night came, how long has this journey been? 2 weeks. 2 weeks in the cold. I mean, rough seas, everything. You go, who's ready to sign up? It says, but when the 14th night came, and keep in mind, how do Jews keep time? Day first or night first? Night first. You're going to see here in a minute, he's going to say on the 14th day. Just realize he's talking about later the same day. But here it is. He says, when the 14th night came, as we were being driven about in the Adriatic Sea, and you kind of see where we are. It says 4, it should say 14 on the map where the ship is, the Adriatic Sea. He says, about midnight, the sailors began to surmise that they were approaching some land. Middle of the night. Don't think like the way we think of midnight as being 12. But just the middle of the night. He says, and they started to surmise that they were approaching some land. What made them think that? I'm not quite sure. But if you notice, they really did think it, because look at the next verse, verse 28. They took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms, and a little farther on they took another sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. Now, you might hear soundings and start thinking about radar. It's not that. What they would do is they would have these long ropes, and they would put something heavy on the end, and whenever it would hit the bottom of the sea, then they would pull it where it was taut, but not pulling yet, and there would be a guy who would stand there on the side of the ship, and he would take it, and he would stretch out his arms and do 1 fathom. That's 6 feet. 2 fathoms. 3 fathoms. And that's how they took the soundings. So it did take time. First sounding, it says here that it was 20 fathoms, so 120 feet deep. 15 fathoms, 90 feet deep. Then, verse 29, fearing that we might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast 4 anchors from the stern is the back of the ship, and wished for daybreak. I mean, notice they're just throwing sterns off, and then they're throwing anchors off the back, just trying to kind of catch some drag so that the ship doesn't get taken into these more shallow parts and break up the ship altogether. I mean, those who own the ship would like the ship to stay in one piece, kind of the same way you like your car to stay in one piece without any dents or dings. Notice how it continues, verse 30. But as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship and had let down the ship's boat, there's our little schooner boat, he says, into the sea, on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow. Oh, what's working inside of them? Well, we've already got the anchors off the back, that's the stern. Now they say, we want to put some anchors off the front of the bow. Hey, we're going to go out and we're going to do that. And we're going to take these down there, and you guys can tie them on, and we'll get them down. And they're going, He says, you're trying to get away, and you're going to take the only little boat we got. Maybe they had multiples, but you're going to take one. Then, verse 31. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, unless these men remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved. Oh, you think that had their attention? Let's see if they come to trust Paul any more now than they did earlier, like 2 weeks ago. Because look at what they do. Verse 32. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. Notice who cuts it away. The soldiers, the very ones who are like going to try and get out there. He says, I'm telling you, if you guys get off, you're not going to be saved. And even makes a statement, you yourselves cannot be saved. Who do they listen to? Paul. Are people starting to see Paul a little different after 2 weeks at sea? You talk about making a difference, just in attitudes, when you choose to speak, when you choose to not speak. Here's some real life application for us. You don't just pipe up on day one. Man, learn what's going on. Learn how people are. Sometimes when you step into a workplace for the first day, people want to change everything. You're going, don't be a fool. Look, figure out what's going on first. Now, here they are as it continues, verse 33. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day. So this is later the same day. Now daybreak has come, 14th day. He says that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. He says, you need some food. He says, today is the day to eat it. And whatever food they had left, they're going to eat, and then look at what they do with the rest. Verse 34, he says, therefore I encourage you to take some food, for this is for your preservation. For not a hair from the head of any of you will perish. How's that for a promise? Now, how can he say that? Because that's what God told him. It's not like he's making this up on his own. It's not like it's a false promise. He's saying, look, you are going to survive. And not a hair of your head. Some of you are thinking, I've seen my sink, and I'm not doing anything stressful, and I got some hair there. But it's an idiom for you're going to be fine. So Then he continues on. Verse 35. Having said this, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and began to eat. Now, when's the last time you had 14-day-old bread and thought, praise the Lord, I have food to eat? We should tell us a little something, right? Now, here it is. Began to eat. He broke it, began to eat. Verse 36, all of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. Notice, I want you to see what's really going on. You already know how this story turns out. To go, they're going to have to do some swimming. And if you haven't eaten a whole lot and you don't have any energy, that's not going to go well. And that water's not going to be warm, that's for sure. It's going to be cold probably. Then, as he continues on, verse 37, here's that number that I told you earlier. All of us in the ship were 276 persons. So realize the ship is big enough to hold almost 300 people. That's not a small ship. Don't think about these people riding in a John boat. Okay? Verse 38. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. Notice, we want to get this ship as high in the water as we can to get it as close to land as we can. And they're just throwing the rest of the rations off. What are they saying? We're getting close to the end. We're going to hit shore one way or the other. Then, continues verse 39. When day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship onto it if they could. We're going to get this thing going as good as we can, and we're just going to take it right onto the beach. What are they saying about the ship? Who cares? Even the owners of the ship are like, if we live, that'll be, I can find another ship. It's kind of the same thing you tell your teenage drivers. As long as you're alive, that's great. I don't care about the car. Now, I mean, and it's not going to be just nice and easy either. That's the plan at this point. Verse 40. I mean, it sounds like a Mediterranean beach. You're going, oh, this sounds wonderful. It is cold. It is, I mean, not good. Verse 40. And casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders, and hoisting the foresail to the wind, they were heading for the beach. They put the sail all the way up. I mean, the foresail is the principal sail on the ship. And they take this thing, they're going, let's get take it up to the highest speed we got. They cut away or loosen all the anchors to let them go. They just leave them in the sea. Let's just see how fast we can get this thing going and get there. Then, verse 41. But striking a reef between where two seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow, which is the very front part of the ship, they're heading right in. He says, the prow struck fast and remained immovable, but the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. You think about this ship going in just as hard as it can, and it hits this reef right between where the waters are coming on either side, and it just starts to shake the back end to where it just takes all the back end apart. I mean, this thing is just disintegrating right behind them. So here they are, but you know they're close enough to where the ship has actually touched the bottom. So they're not really far off of land, except for the fact if you've ever been out to the ocean, you know you can get like 20 feet out and still only be like up to your chest in some places, or even further. So realize just because it's shallow doesn't mean, oh, okay, it's just 20 feet away. Don't think that. Then, continues on verse 42. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners. Ooh. Well. So that none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion, notice his motive, but the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. There's still enough water to swim. He says, you guys swim on up. Then verse 44. He says, and the rest should follow, some on planks, and they made themselves available. He says, and others on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they all were brought safely to land. All being in caps in my mind. And you realize it happened just the way that God told his angel to tell Paul. And Paul told them. And you realize, who's ready for a 2-week cruise? Anybody? No, of course not. But keep in mind, did God take care of Paul and Luke and Aristarchus and even those who are with them? Other people have an effect on how you live in those things. All right, Lord willing, we'll come back next week, and we'll be on the island of Malta. All right. Have a good one.